You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
You know, so that stuck with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then
Sometimes.
they cheated. The guy got leprosy when Adam was going to get paid for it. I mean, boy, there's a lot that goes on in that Old Testament that's sneaky.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Sneaky or
Yeah. It makes you wonder, like, you're saying, like, sometimes God uses the weirdest things to
Right.
do things, and you don't really think much about, like, you look at the Bible, you realize that God sometimes asks things of people that it doesn't make sense.
right.
And I think a lot of times he does that because if he asks you to do something that you could do in your own power, you could easily be like, oh, I could have done that. Like, it was me who did that.
Right.
But when he asks you to do things that are like outside of, that seem either too simple or seem too, it's like, hey, that's how God gets the glory. And that's what God look. I mean, God wants. I mean, I don't want to say like God wants the glory, but it's like He wants people to be like, this is me. It wasn't you. It wasn't what you could do, but it was what I do. And so you use a lot of times He uses things that we think seem simple or seem completely out there, but He's like, I don't want anybody ever thinking that it was you that did it, because I did it. So. Anything else?
I came across a verse in my Bible reading that I had completely forgotten about. Psalms chapter 30. So I'm like way behind on this. Sing unto the Lord, O ye saints of His, and give thanks for the remembrance of His holiness. For His anger endureth but a moment. In His favor is life. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning.
Yeah.
Whatever your situation, my situation, and I actually have asked the Lord, are you mad at me? Weeping may endure for a night. We all go through seasons, but joy comes in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's at the end of your night or whether it's the morning of eternity, I can't say. I'm just saying that our seasons aren't going to last forever. God sees, God knows, and joy is going to come in the morning. In His presence is fullness of joy. With joy we draw water from the wells of salvation.
Who's preaching here tonight? You preaching here?
I think Amy's preaching tonight. They were teaching. Well, if no one has anything else, I'll start with what I have tonight. I know you guys have been reading. You wrapped up John recently, and John 21 is probably one of my favorite interactions that Jesus has with His disciples, is in John 21. I know that usually when you go into the end of the Gospels, at the end of each Gospel, when Jesus is with His disciples, there's always that great commission. There's always, He's always talking to them about he's come back and he's encouraging His disciples after His crucifixion. But there's something about John 21 and this interaction. And it's interesting because the book of John's written obviously by John, but he does this, encapsulates this conversation between Jesus and Peter that is I think is so interesting to me. Because if you start reading the book of John 21, the chapter of John 21, it serves as this crucial moment of this post-resurrection interaction that Jesus has in His appearance with His disciples. It's this crucial moment, and it's basically, like I said, it's John describing this interaction with Peter. It's like a second-hand or a third account of like this interaction here that takes place. And in the beginning, it starts out, in the very beginning of the chapter, it starts out with basically Peter's like, I'm going back fishing. And so they go back fishing, and they out fishing all night, catch no fish. And then somebody calls from the shore, says, cast your nets on the other side. And they cast on the other side, and they pull up just loads of fish. And then John says, that's Jesus. And Peter like instantly jumps out of the boat and like swims to shore. And it shows you that this interaction between like just how broken Peter was after his denial of Jesus 3 times. And my wife Lee and I were talking about the way here, and I think it's also an interesting like description, like when like all these things, like when Jesus, when they were on the boat before, Peter calls out to Jesus when he sees him on the water, outside the boat. He says, "If you're Jesus, call me, I'll come out to you." But at this time, somebody proclaimed it, said, "This is Jesus." He didn't even wait. He didn't ask and say, "If this is Jesus, I'm going to jump over and swim over to the shore." No, he as soon as he recognized it was Jesus, he jumped out of the boat and he swam to Jesus. And the other thing I thought was, like, we were talking about, interesting is when he got to shore, they asked him, Jesus asked him to bring the fish together, but he already had fish and fish and bread already ready to go. And it's kind of like the call back to the 5 loaves and 2 fish type thing as well. It's like you see like these little things like that, that to maybe we don't think much about, but it's like how they recognize Jesus in those moments, because they recognize him through the things that he did, the actions that he took, and they're seeing that in this moment. Like when John says this is Jesus, Jesus is affirming it through these different things that he's showing to his disciples. But we find that this moment, that Peter is a broken man grappling with this moment of like these 3 denials that he made of Jesus, and he, if I could say this, he overestimates his own commitment at that earlier on when he says, and saying that how much he truly loved God, and he's like, I'm never going to deny you. Like, I'm never going to do this. And he overestimates his commitment to God, because he's like Jesus, like you're gonna deny me 3 times before morning happens, before the cock crows. You're gonna deny me 3 times before the cock crows. And he's like, never. I'm never going to do it. And he's like makes this like bold proclamation that even if it's in Mark 14, he says, even if everybody else fails you, I'm never going to fail you. And here he is, like after the crucifixion, he's grappling with this idea that like this idea that I told him I was never going to do this, and here I did it anyways. And so you see this like interaction, that's this crucial interaction that happens between Peter and Jesus that's recorded by John. And I think it's such an interesting, like I said, John wrote the book. I mean, he could write about himself, like his interaction with Jesus at this moment. He could write anything he wanted, but he decides to take a deep dive into this interaction between Peter and Jesus. And so I find it so interesting. And so we begin in verse 15. After they'd eaten and everything, he had the fire going, and he gets there, and Jesus says to Peter, he says, and I think this is interesting too. I'm gonna call this out. He says that Jesus called him not by his name that he had given him, but he called him. He says, Simon, son of Jonah. Like he calls him by his name that isn't the name that he gave him. He calls him like this, he says, "Do you love me more than these?" And I find that like even like if you think about how those interactions happen, like God doesn't waste anything. Like these little things that we think, like we just read and we're like, oh, Simon, son of Jonah, not a big deal. We just think, oh, he's just calling by his name. But I believe that there's significance there. Like you denied me 3 times. I gave you this name. You said you're going to be, and you denied me 3 times. So he's like, he's beginning this restoration process with Peter. That he starts out with this statement, says, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? And this statement, and he goes on and Peter's like, you know that I love you more than these. You know that I love you more than, and I think there's a lot of speculation what these is. All right, I'm gonna throw that out there. There's a lot of speculation. There's some statements as, do you love me more than these, referring to, do you love me more than these other guys love me? Do you love me more than these other disciples love me? And there's speculation that he's making a statement, do you love me more than you love this fishing equipment and these boats and all these things? Do you love me more than, and then there's that other option is, do you love me more than you love your brothers, the disciples here? Do you love me more than these individuals that are here with you? And I think that's a very ambiguous question that comes out first, is that we can take and we can look at and say, almost like it breaks into three different areas. Do you love me more than other people love me? And we can look at ourselves as like, do I love God? Do I really love God? Like this question that maybe causes Peter to have introspection, we can look at and say, cause us introspection and say, do I love God as much as I claim that I love God? Or do I love God more than I love my career? More than I love the things that I do, the things that I'm investing all my effort and my life into? Do I love God more than that? Or do I love God more than I love the people around me? Do I love God more than the people that I see and my children, my family? And do I love God more than I love these? And like I said, there's that ambiguous kind of question that we get asked. And and if you read through it, I'm sure that there's Bible scholars that have 10 different ways of interpreting what they think these represents. And obviously it is true, because if you go look at commentaries, you're going to find multiple different people saying, these represents this. And I just want to make sure that we make that it's ambiguous. We don't know what these is. We don't know if he was pointing to a parrot on the beach. We have no idea what he was pointing to. We just know that he says, do you love me more than these? And I think it's an interesting question that he asks Peter. And so he goes, and so the question goes on, do you love me more than these? And he says, you know that I love you. He says, then feed my lambs. And then he asks him a third time, and he says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter's like, yeah, I love you. I love you, God. I love you, Jesus, of course. And he's like, then tend my sheep. And then he goes on the third time and he says, do you love me? And it says that Peter is grieved in his heart at this point. He's grieved. And again, he's a broken man at this point. And now the person that he followed for 3 years and he dedicated 3 years to is now asking him a third time, do you love me, Peter? And he says, you know all things, God. You know all these things. You know that I love you. And he says, then tend my sheep. And I think when I begin to look at this passage, there's some nuance in the statement love that we see here in this passage. When Jesus asks Peter if he loves, do you love me? The first two times he says, do you love me, Peter? And it refers to this agape love, this unconditional. Do you love me unconditionally? Do you love me with an ultimate commitment? And Peter replies to Jesus, you know I love you. And the Greek is the philos, which is the brotherly, the relationship, like the kind of love that you have with a friend. And he's like, Peter, do you love me unconditionally with ultimate commitment? Knowing that he denied him 3 times. Do you love me with ultimate commitment unconditionally? And he's like, and I think I feel like his response, because he's feeling the weight of the rejection that he gave God. He's feeling the weight of this denial. And he says, so his response to God is, you're a friend. You're like my best, deepest friends. Of course I love you. And he's replying to God in this relational sense. But in the last time that Jesus asked Peter, he said, do you love me, Peter? The way when he asked that last question to Peter, Jesus uses the word philos. The same love that that Peter responded to. Do you love me? Do you love me? Are you my friend? Do you love me? Are you my friend? Are you? And he says, and that's when Peter gets grieved in his heart, because he just been telling God, of course, I love you. You know that I love you. Like, you're everything in this regard. You're like this relationship thing. And this last time is like, it's even calling into question like his commitment to him as a person, like his friendship. And he's like, it grieves him when he says this. And when I think to myself in this whole process of, that Jesus was kind of helping beginning this restoration process in Peter's life. Peter was a man who was broken. He denied Christ 3 times, and he needed restoration. He needed a place where he could go, and Jesus is like, I know you denied me 3 times, so I'm gonna bring this full circle. I'm gonna bring this full circle, and I'm gonna ask if you love me. And it was very intentional, because it began this process of restoring him back to what he was. And that's why I don't think it was a mistake that he called him Simon, son of Jonah, because this was like, it's almost like he's starting from square one and saying, do you love me? You denied me, so I can't call you by your name yet, the one I gave you, and he's like, starts this restoration process with Peter. And like I said, I find this interaction so amazing, because there's so many things we could pull from this. We could probably spend, I bet you we could spend a multiple series on just this passage of Scripture. Whenever I use this passage, I love this passage. Whenever I use it, I always talk about if you love me, then feed my sheep. And I'm going to get there in just a second, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But I want to talk about this moment, this interaction between Jesus and Peter when he's like, do you love me? And I think at this moment, Peter also probably realizes that he's not there yet now. After these denials, he's struggling with, I denied you 3 times, and so I can't even think about what does unconditionally look like at this moment. I can't even think about what unconditionally looks like, because I denied you 3 times. I can't even comprehend what unconditional is, like with all commitment. And so I think that's why the last time Jesus responds with, do you love me, in that brotherly sense, coming to where Peter is. And Peter's making these statements, I love you in this way, because this is how he's trying to begin this commitment back to God. And so I like I said, I think it's this idea that, and that we grapple with a lot in our own lives. Because we struggle with sin. We struggle with a sinful nature that wants to do our own thing. Reason that Peter denied Christ 3 times was because he was trying to save his own skin. He's like, I'll never reject you. I'll never deny you. If everybody else fails you, I'll never fail you. And here he fails him. And it's that same sinful nature that we struggle with all the time. And sometimes when we struggle with those things in our own life, we're like, when Jesus comes down, when we feel like Jesus comes knocking at our door, we're like, I don't know if I can, if I really even understand what truly unconditional love is. And so I think that's where Peter is at this moment, is this moment of this place of trying to grapple with those sins, that denial, and he's trying to get back to a place of where he was in relationship with God before the crucifixion. And so this is an awesome story of redemption. It's an awesome story of Jesus redeeming and restoring Peter from the one that denied him, the one that denied him 3 times, and bringing him back to a place of I want to still use you. I still have a place for you. I still have a purpose for you. I still have a calling for you. I still have a place where I want to use you. And he's beginning that restoration process. And what I love about, and I always say this, but there's this thing that when I look at a lot of, we've been given them this, when the Bible talks about us been given the spirit of reconciliation. But I believe that like the one thing that God does, Jesus does so amazing is that he's the only one that can restore. Like Peter was in a place of like utter brokenness. And no matter what anybody would say to him, he probably would never feel like he could ever truly make it back to that same place with Jesus. Unless Jesus was there to begin that restoration process. And I feel like that's where, when I look at this passage, I look at this story, I start to realize that it was that only Jesus restores. Because no matter what anybody else said, he would never feel like he could get to that place again unless Jesus came in and began that restoration process. And I want you to know that, and I want you to know that Jesus is the only one that can restore. If you're dealing with struggles in your life, if you're dealing with things in your life that maybe you've kind of like, I don't know how I'm going to get through these things, turn to Jesus, because he's the one that restores. He's the one that brings help. He's the one that brings peace and understanding. And so that's why I love this passage. That's why I love this passage of John, because it brings this underscores this whole thing, this whole interaction between Jesus and Peter in the book of John. I think it's such a great passage. Like I said, I could go on further. I just want to touch on one thing though, in this thing though, when he talks to Peter, he said it's this restoration, but it's also this continued call back to the pastoral ministry for Peter. If you love me, feed my sheep. And this idea that if we really love God, it's evident by how we love one another. Like how we show that we love God. Like I can't fake loving people. I could fake, that's where legalism comes in. Like you want me to wear want me to wear certain clothing, you want me to do this, I can fake that. I can fake those things. I can be legalistic. I can definitely look the part. Or I can act the part. But I can't fake loving people. And so Jesus says, he says, you love me, Peter? He's like, yeah, I love you. He's like, this is how we measure how much that I know that you love me, is by how you treat one another, how you love one another, how you treat my church, how you love my church, how you love the people of God. That's how we know, and how we I hate to say measure, but that's how we know we can measure our love and that's how Jesus recognizes us. And he says, and the world will know you. This is the Bible. Jesus said, the world will know you're my disciples by how you love one another. And so he makes that very distinct call as well. So again, I could go on for a long time with the whole this whole passage, especially when it comes down to the feed my sheep, tend my sheep. There's a lot there, but I really want to just talk a little bit about that, because when you think about, as you wrapped up John 21, I just wanted to bring into your mind what an interesting and amazing interaction this is that we're getting witness to between Jesus and Peter. And we're seeing active restoration taking place at that moment. When there could have been filled with anything at the end. It could have been anything that John wanted to write, but here he is writing about this interaction between Jesus and Peter, and I think it's just a great imagery. And so that's all I really have. Like I said, I would love to go longer, but I'm gonna cut it off there, because. But anything else? Any have anything they want to share? Any thoughts?
Well, you were saying that, I was thinking how to put that in perspective of what we do today, this current age. And the thought came to my mind that, like, you can be dating somebody, or you can be engaged to somebody, or you can be married to somebody. It's like that's three different ways that we express our level of love, let's say it that way.
Mhm.
Kind of, you know, when I was thinking about it like that, it's like that's a really good way to put it in today's terms, you know, to look at it. Because I was always, when I heard it before, it's like, why do they have all these different ways of saying they love them? You know?
Mm.
It's like I love cheeseburgers and stuff. Al loves pizza.
Yeah.
But to try to, you know, throw a spin on the words like that and really picture it, you know, it's the relationship levels that we're kind of talking about
Mhm.
and how deep those levels are.
Yeah.
I wasn't even that deep. I just thought he asked him 3 times because he denied him 3 times.
Yeah. I mean, that's.
And so that way, I wouldn't
Yep.
even go that deep in all of it, so that was good.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely was the. I mean, I believe that's why he asked him 3 times because of
Yep.
the denial.
Cancel him out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just went a little deep on it. You're right. I went. I went a little overboard.
Yeah, no, it was good. I just never
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
that much about the love and what the love's meant.
I think we should be able to take encouragement from this passage because